You ever get the feeling that the economy is this giant, messy thing nobody really understands? Like it's too complex, too far removed from everyday life? I used to think the same. But the more I sat with it, the more I realized, underneath all the jargon and charts, it's really just people exchanging things, over and over again. I know that sounds too simple, but bear with me. At its core, the economy works like a machine. A basic one, really. Just a bunch of transactions, billions of them, playing out every day. Buying a coffee, paying rent, lending money, taking a loan. All of those tiny moves add up into this massive system we call the economy. And here's where it gets interesting. Those transactions are driven by human nature. Our habits, our hopes, our fear of missing out, our need to feel secure. You follow that thread long enough, you start to see patterns, big ones. Now, there are three main forces that shape how this machine runs. They aren't complicated, just powerful. One is productivity growth, the second is short-term debt cycles, and the third, well, that's the long-term debt cycle. Don't worry, we'll unpack each of them slowly. No lectures here, just a walk through the mechanics. Let's start where it all begins, transactions. An economy is just a collection of transactions, nothing mystical. Every time you buy something, a book, a burger, a used bike, you're making a transaction. One person spends, the other earns. Money or credit moves from buyer to seller and something of value goes the other way. That's it. And here's a key part. It doesn't matter if you pay in cash or on credit. Both drive spending. And spending? That's what keeps this whole thing moving. More spending means more income for someone else. And that sets off a chain reaction. It always comes back to that. One person's spending is another person's income. This is where most people zone out. But don't. Because once you get this part, everything else makes more sense. Markets? They're just a bunch of people trading the same thing. A wheat market, a housing market, a stock market, a market for every imaginable thing, really. And when you zoom out and stack all those markets together, you get an economy. And once you start seeing it like that, just people buying and selling, it's a lot less intimidating, isn't it? So here's where things start to twist a bit. Credit. It sounds dry, I know. The word alone makes you think of bank paperwork or some lecture about fiscal responsibility. But honestly, credit is kind of the secret engine underneath everything. Most people don't really get how central it is. Or how strange it is if you think about it. Because credit is made up. Two people agree that one of them will pay the other back later, and suddenly there's new money in the system. Just like that, out of thin air. You and a lender can literally create it with a handshake and a promise. Now, once that agreement is made, credit turns into debt. It becomes an asset for the lender and a burden for the borrower. Two sides of the same coin. Eventually, the borrower pays it back, hopefully, and that transaction settles. But in the meantime, that debt is active. It moves. It ripples. And this is why it matters. When someone gets credit, they can spend more than they actually have. That spending becomes someone else's income. And if that person earns more, they look more attractive to lenders. They get more credit, which they spend, which becomes someone else's income. You see where this is going, right? It's a loop, a self-reinforcing cycle, and that's how economies grow in the short term. Not from some magical boost in productivity, but because we keep pulling spending from the future into the present, over and over again. Eventually, though, it has to flip. What goes up? But before we get there, let's zoom in for a second. A person's creditworthiness comes down to two things: their ability to repay and what they can offer as collateral. If their income's solid, if they own things that can be sold off if things go south, they seem safe to lend to. And so they borrow. They spend. The system hums along. But that hum can get loud. Too loud. Because the more we borrow, the more we have to pay back later. And that later always comes. Credit gives us the illusion of growing wealth in the short term, but it's borrowed time. Literally. And that's what gives birth to cycles. Not because of regulation, not because of law, but because of human nature. Our desire to live a little ahead of ourselves, and the reality that we eventually have to catch up. So imagine things are going well. People are borrowing, spending, incomes are rising, businesses are growing. Everything looks good, better than good. Optimism is in the air, and it's all being fueled by credit. Invisible promises floating everywhere, making things move faster than they probably should. Now, that's the start of what we call a short-term debt cycle. It's like a party that slowly gets louder. You don't notice it at first, but eventually the music's blaring and someone's about to knock over the table. When credit flows freely, people spend more. That drives demand up. Prices start rising. We call that inflation, but you already knew that. What matters more is what comes next. The central bank, think of it like the chaperone at this party, starts to worry. Inflation gets too high? They step in. How? They raise interest rates, which is their way of saying, hey, slow down. And when rates go up, borrowing gets more expensive. Monthly payments rise. People hesitate. Suddenly that new car or house or business idea doesn't feel quite as doable. So people pull back. They borrow less. They spend less. And just like before, when spending more led to income rising, this works in reverse too. Less spending means someone else earns less. That person cuts back, and the whole system begins to cool off. It's not a crash. Yet, it's just the other half of the cycle, the downswing. Recession is what we call it. It's a scary word, but it's also just part of the rhythm. The central bank sees this happening and lowers interest rates again, trying to soften the landing, trying to make borrowing a bit easier. And if they time it right, things start picking back up. Expansion, recession, expansion, recession, over and over every few years, like breathing in and out. This short-term cycle usually lasts around 5 to 8 years. It's not perfect, but it repeats often enough that we recognize the pattern now, and each time it ends, we're left with a little more debt than we had before. A little more optimism that maybe next time the party won't end, that we figured it out, but we haven't, not really. Because debt doesn't just disappear, it lingers. And over decades, those little cycles build into something heavier, something slower, something harder to unwind. That's where the long-term debt cycle starts to sneak in. So here's the thing most people miss. Every time that short-term cycle finishes, every boom and bust, we're not exactly starting fresh. We're carrying something forward. More debt, it builds, quietly. Each time, just a little more than before. And for a while, no one really minds because everything still looks fine. Incomes are rising. Asset prices, homes, stocks, whatever, keep going up. People feel richer. Borrowing more doesn't feel dangerous when everything seems to be working. That's when bubbles start forming. Not always obvious at first, they don't announce themselves, but the signs are there. Easy credit, soaring markets, people borrowing money just to buy things they think will go up so they can sell them later at a profit. You know that feeling when everyone's getting in on something and you wonder if you're missing out? That's bubble territory. And it can go on for years, sometimes decades, until it doesn't. Because eventually, no matter how good it all looks on paper, debt starts to outpace income, slowly at first, then all at once. The payments get harder to manage, people start cutting back, and remember, that cuts someone else's income, which cuts their spending, and around it goes. But this time, lowering interest rates isn't enough. The usual tools don't work, because we've already used them. We've pushed rates as low as they can go, sometimes even to zero. That's when things get serious. Not just a recession, a full-on deleveraging. If that word sounds heavy, it's because it is. It means we've passed the point of adjustment and entered a new phase, one where everything has to shrink. Debt, spending, expectations, it's a slow, painful unwinding, and it's happened before. 2008, the Great Depression, Japan in the 90s. Each one followed the same pattern. The long-term debt cycle finally reached its peak, and reality came calling. People start defaulting, selling assets, trying to stay afloat. The markets crash, banks get nervous, credit dries up. Not because no one wants to borrow, but because no one's willing to lend anymore. It's like the whole system forgets how to trust. And the irony? All of this starts not because of some external disaster, but because we believed too strongly that the good times would last forever. So now we're in it. The boom has faded. The debt is too heavy. People are scared, and there's no more room to lower interest rates. The system's stuck. This is what a deleveraging looks like. And to be honest, it's not pretty. Spending drops hard. Incomes fall. People lose their jobs. Businesses close. Credit doesn't just slow down, it vanishes. It's like someone sucked the air out of the room. And because everyone's trying to make ends meet, they start selling what they can. Houses, docks, whatever still holds value. But the more people sell, the more prices fall. And the more prices fall, the poorer everyone feels. That makes lenders even more cautious, which makes credit even tighter. It's a downward spiral. And the worst part? You can't fix it the usual way. In a regular recession, the central bank can just cut interest rates and kickstart borrowing again. But in a deleveraging, that doesn't work. Because nobody wants to borrow. Not anymore. They're tapped out. Worn down. Done. Debt has become this weight people are dragging behind them. It's not just about the numbers anymore, it's emotional. People stop believing they'll ever climb out. They stop trying. And lenders, they see the writing on the wall. They know the money they lent out might never come back. Some of it wasn't real to begin with. Just promises that now feel broken. It's like waking up and realizing all the wealth you thought you had wasn't really there. So what happens? People and companies default, banks collapse, governments try to hold things together, but even they're bleeding out. Tax revenues crash, social safety nets are stretched thin. The system starts cannibalizing itself. You start hearing words like austerity, which is just a polite way of saying everyone has to tighten their belt at the worst possible time. And then come the cracks, real cracks. Not just in the economy, but in society. Resentment builds. The people who have nothing look at the people who still have something and start asking hard questions. The people who still have something start blaming everyone else for trying to take it. It gets tense, sometimes worse than tense. History's shown us where this can go. The 1930s weren't just about numbers on a chart, they were about suffering, radical politics, even war. When people are scared and desperate, they'll follow anyone who promises a way out. It's not just an economic downturn anymore, it's a social fracture, a psychological one. So when a country's knee-deep in a deleveraging, it really only has a handful of options, 4 to be exact. And none of them are clean. They all leave scars, but they're the only paths forward. The first one is obvious: cut spending. Everyone tightens their belts. Households, businesses, even the government. Try to live below your means, pay down debt. Sounds responsible, right? But there's a catch. When everyone cuts spending at the same time, incomes collapse. Because again, one person's spending is someone else's paycheck. If I stop buying, you stop earning. If you stop earning, you stop buying. It snowballs. So instead of fixing the debt burden, it actually makes it worse. At least at first. This is why austerity, while logical on paper, can be brutal in practice. It squeezes everyone, especially the most vulnerable. The second way is default or restructuring. Basically, you admit you can't pay the debt back as promised. Maybe you negotiate lower payments or stretch them over more years, or just stop paying altogether. For the borrower, it's a release. But for the lender, that promise, that asset, suddenly evaporates. What they thought was wealth is now gone. It rattles the whole system. Banks panic, trust erodes, and asset values drop even faster. Again, it's a messy fix. The third option is to redistribute wealth. That's when the government steps in and tries to rebalance things. Usually by taxing the rich more and helping the poor stay afloat. Whether it's higher taxes, subsidies, stimulus checks, or bailouts, it all amounts to shifting money around. And yeah, it's controversial. It creates tension. The haves feel punished. The have-nots feel desperate. And resentment simmers on both sides. Sometimes it boils over. Still, without some kind of redistribution, a society risks tearing itself apart. It's not just economic anymore, it's social. Then there's the fourth path. Printing money. Now this one, it's tempting. Because it seems like a magic trick. You just create more money, pump it into the system, and suddenly there's life again. Markets stabilize. People feel hopeful. But it's a double-edged sword. Done carefully, it can help soften the blow. Fill the gap left by vanishing credit. But done recklessly, you get inflation. Or worse, hyperinflation. Like Germany in the 1920s, when money lost value so fast people used it as wallpaper. The trick is balance. Print enough to keep the gears turning, but not so much that the whole machine melts down. And here's the strange part. All four of these things usually happen together. Not one after the other, but overlapping. The country cuts spending, restructures debt, shifts wealth, and prints money. All at once, trying to find a mix that hurts the least. It's like juggling knives, while blindfolded, in a windstorm. But if they get the mix just right, something rare happens. Something called a beautiful deleveraging. I know, sounds like a contradiction, but it means pulling off this impossible dance where debt goes down, the economy grows, even if slowly, and inflation stays in check. It's rare, it's fragile, but it can happen. So, let's say the country pulls it off. They manage to find that weird, delicate balance. Not too much spending cut, not too much money printed, not too much pressure on the rich, but just enough of each to keep things from breaking apart. What happens then? You get what some economists call a beautiful deleveraging. And yeah, it's kind of a strange phrase. Beautiful probably isn't the word most people would use when they're still broke or out of work. But in this context, it just means the system holds together. It bends but doesn't snap. Debt starts to shrink relative to income. Slowly. Real economic growth picks up. Again, slowly. And inflation, it stays in check. Not too high, not too low. People don't feel rich, but they stop feeling like they're drowning. That's the difference. One key part of this is that central banks start pumping just enough money into the system to replace what credit used to do. They're careful, measured. Every dollar printed is supposed to patch a hole, not fuel a fire. And it works, but only if incomes start growing faster than the interest owed on all that accumulated debt. Think about that for a second. If the country owes as much in debt as it makes in a year, let's say a 100% debt-to-income ratio, and interest is 2%, but income only grows at 1%, the burden just keeps getting heavier, no matter how hard you work. But flip that. Let income grow at 3%, and suddenly the weight starts lifting. That's the goal. And if that happens, little by little, trust starts to come back. Lenders become a bit less nervous. Borrowers feel a bit more confident. People start to spend, not wildly, but with a bit more hope. The gears start turning again, slowly, quietly. Eventually, this moves into what's called the reflation phase of the long-term debt cycle. That's when the economy starts to breathe again. Not like the booms from before, but something more stable, more grounded. It's not magic, it's not overnight. It can take a decade or more. They call it a lost decade sometimes, and maybe that's fair. But what gets lost isn't just time, it's illusion. The illusion that debt could grow forever without consequences, that growth could be borrowed endlessly. What comes back in its place, if we're lucky, is something a little more sober, a little more real. So after all that, the booms, the busts, the panic, the recovery, what's left? Honestly, not a grand conclusion. Just a few things that are easy to forget when everything's moving fast. The first is about debt and income. If your debt grows faster than your income, it's only a matter of time. You can fake it for a while, even feel pretty good about it, but eventually the math wins. It always does. That burden catches up. The second is subtler. If your income rises faster than your productivity, you'll look fine on the outside, but slowly become uncompetitive. You're earning more, sure, but you're not producing more. And the world notices. The third one's the quietest, but maybe the most important. Long term. It's all about productivity. That's the thing you can actually control. Learning more, working smarter, building things that last. It doesn't give you the highs that credit does, but it doesn't give you the crashes either. It's steadier, harder maybe, but real. And maybe that's the thing to hold on to in all of this. Because most people, governments included, don't really think in cycles. We like to believe the moment we're in is the one that's going to last. If we're thriving, we assume it'll go on forever. If we're struggling, we forget it'll pass. But this system we live in, this economic machine, it's always moving, breathing, expanding, contracting. It's not about good or bad, right or wrong. It's just what happens when people borrow and spend and try to live a little ahead of themselves. If you understand that, even a little, you stop being surprised when things go sideways. You stop overreacting when they go up or down. You just adjust, keep your eyes open, Try to stay grounded. This whole framework, it worked for Ray Dalio, helped him see through the noise. Maybe it'll help you too. But even if it doesn't, just remembering that the economy isn't some abstract monster, it's just us making decisions over and over. That alone makes it a little less scary, a little more human, a little